Yesterday, our objective was to be able to distinguish between a hydrolysis reaction and a dehydration reaction. Now, who can tell me, just a quick review, what is the difference between a dehydration reaction and a hydrolysis reaction? Lewis? Dehydration takes out the water and combines the two monomers. Excellent. What about a hydrolysis? Okay. What about a hydrolysis then, Jamie? It adds water and does what? It adds water, and what happens right here? Who can help? What happens right there? It breaks it down. Okay? So, when we have the hydrolysis, the adding of water breaks down something bigger into the monomers. When we had the dehydration, it takes the smaller monomers and combines them together. Okay? Now, today we are going to start our discussion on carbohydrates. Start our discussion on carbohydrates. So, certain objectives of carbohydrates. Number one, you should be able to tell me what a carbohydrate is made of when we're completed with this. Number two, you should be able to tell me both the monomers and polymers of carbohydrates. The monomer and polymer of carbohydrates. Third thing, you should be able to give me some examples of carbohydrates. Okay? If you look up here, we've got plenty of examples of carbohydrates. Sugars, starches. Okay? Sugars and starches, and we can see we got the gummy bears. Okay? We've got the bread, the grains, the bagels. We've got the fruits. And what are those guys? Potatoes. An excellent way to get starch into our bodies. All of those are carbohydrates. Okay? Remember that, because you're going to be asked later on today to draw a picture in your interactive notebook of a carbohydrate. Something that reminds you of what a carbohydrate is. Carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And you're going to see on our next slide that they're usually in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. 1 carbon to 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. Okay? Carbohydrates. Their monomers are simple sugars, one of which is glucose. Okay? So a monomer of a carbohydrate would be glucose. Living things use carbohydrates for energy. Use carbohydrates for energy. I remember when I coached football, when I used to coach football, we would like for our athletes to eat a high carbohydrate diet the day before a game. That way they would have a lot of energy for the game. So carbohydrates are used for energy. Examples: pasta, bread. Just like I said, when I was a coach, our meal, one of our meals that we would eat would be pasta, because it's a very high carbohydrate diet. Pasta. So we would have our guys eat that pasta. We're doing that. Now, if you look at this diagram here, this diagram here has some different carbohydrates. Okay, has some different carbohydrates. If you look down here, what did I tell you about a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio? 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. And you can see that we have oxygens here, we have carbons here, we have hydrogens here. Now, these are two monomers, glucose and fructose. We're going to give those two things a name here coming up, and they are what we call monosaccharides. We'll get to that there here in a second. But if you look, glucose and fructose right here. You know what happens, ladies and gentlemen? What does this look like here? Well, it is sucrose, but what do you think happens with sucrose? Huh? A dehydration synthesis. Okay? So a dehydration synthesis, we take out a water molecule and we combine the glucose and the fructose to form sucrose. So that's an example of that dehydration we talked about yesterday. Here we go. Two monomers combining to get a polymer. Okay, in this case, we call these disaccharides. So if you look, single sugars are what we call monosaccharides. Monosaccharides link together and form polysaccharides. Now, one thing that I don't have in your notes, you know what? I don't have it up here, I don't have it up here, but you know what? It is in your notes. Two sugars, What are two sugars called, you think? It is sucrose. That's an example right here. What's that say? Disaccharide. An example of a disaccharide is sucrose. But what I want you to put in that blank there that I don't have, where it says two sugars are called disaccharides. Many, this should probably be changed a little bit. Monosaccharides that are linked together are called polysaccharides. See, how many right here are linked together? How many monosaccharides are linked together there? 4 of them, right? So that would be a polysaccharide. Many. Monosaccharides are 1. Those are the monomers right here. And disaccharides are 2. Now, let's go back to this again here. So right here, an example of a monosaccharide would be glucose. Another example of a monosaccharide would be fructose. An example of a disaccharide, the two of them combined, is sucrose. I haven't given you an example of a polysaccharide yet. Here's our polysaccharide. Polysaccharide. Starch. Starch is just basically a lot of sugar molecules joined together. And that sugar molecule that's joined together is glucose. Now, if you look at the bottom of the notes that I gave you, what is the example? What is the example of the notes I gave you? Chitin. Okay? If you look down there, that is chitin. The chitin has how many monosaccharides combined? What do you think? How many monosaccharides are combined on that chitin? 5 of them. Good. 5 of them. Good. Okay? Now, what I would like for you to do